Okay, I will try to illustrate the process of reconstruction of Hegelian logic to show you that it's not just my mental delirium, but it's happening in the world by three illustrations and examples which are familiar to some or many people in the Western world. The Great Replacement, transgender identity, and white identity, we could say, white nationalism, and so on. When people talk about the Great Replacement, they unconsciously admit that if you change the proportions of people within a country, you change the being of the country. For instance, if you take Germany, if you go from 40 million people who are identified as German to 80 million people identify as Germans a few generations later, this is a massive quantitative change. You have doubled the population, but no one will say that Germany lost its identity or its being, because, as Hegel says, quantitative changes are indifferent to being. When you change the quantity of a thing, you do not change the being of a thing, except that quantity is derived from quality at the beginning of Hegel's logic, so that there comes a point when a quantitative change, which seems at first indifferent, will actually turn into a qualitative change, and quality is one with being. When we say that something is, we predicate a quality to it. And an example from physics, if in European standards you have water at 99 degree, it's very hot water, but it's not yet vapor. Or if you have water at 1 degree, it's not yet ice. But you go from 2 degree to 1 degree, it doesn't change anything. But you go from 1 degree to 0, then the quantitative change induces a qualitative change, and water turns into ice. And what people say about the Great Replacement is that they often say, yeah, in the 1950s there were whatever, America was 90% white and now it's only 60% white, and they implicitly admit that quantity and quality are united, and that a quantitative change can change the measure of a thing, because a measure is the unity of quality and quantity, and measure is the full completeness of being. And after being, there's essence and concept in Hegel's logic, but being is determined as being measure. Everything has its measure. And they will admit that, yeah, America was better when it was 90% white, and now it's only 60% white, and that's not good. So, or people who say, yeah, if you have 5% of Muslims, that's okay, but when it's 15% or 20%, that's too much. So they implicitly admit that quality and quantity are one, and that if you lose the measure, the proportion of being, you lose the being. People who say, Charles de Gaulle, the French president, said that French people had to remain the majority because if France was not majority white, Christian, Greco-Roman people, it would lose its identity. So that's an applied example of Hegelian logic, that if you lose the measure, you lose the being. That's what people implicitly think. And then about transgender identity. Hegel says that the formal rule of Aristotelian logic, A equals A, it doesn't mean anything. If you say God is God, a tree is a tree, a man is a man, you say nothing. In order for knowledge to occur, you have to introduce difference, and to say that God is not only God, but he's also man. A tree is not only a tree, but it's a living organism, and so on and so on. And the transgender people are trying unconsciously to reestablish this absolute identity of A and not A, which is speculative identity, within their own physical being by being both male and female. And in the speculative consideration of God, the male principle and the female principle are one, but it's in the realm of pure thought. If you try to implement that in the realm of nature, it's kind of inverted logic. And the transgender people, they are trying to reconstruct in the realm of nature the Platonic myth in the symposium of the soulmate and the androgynous being who was, or which was, both male and female. So they are unconsciously motivated by Hegelian logic and philosophical search for wisdom. And that's another example. And the third example, the white identity or nationalist identity. Hegel says that identity defines itself in opposition to difference. Difference is essential precisely to identity. You are what you are only to the extent that you are not what you are not. The difference from you give you your identity. And by introducing difference in the form of people of different cultures, origins, and ethnicities, and religions in the West, the Westerners are forced to, by being confronted by people that they at first sometimes consider as different, by determining the difference, they reciprocally determine their own identity and they reconstruct their identity. And if you take the logical process to the end, the most so-called white, but strictly speaking, it's no longer white, but the highest white identity is Hegel's philosophy, and Hegel's philosophy teaches us that identity and difference are identical, and therefore white and non-white, in a speculative consideration of things, in the mind of God, they are identical. But in order to re-establish the speculative identity, you have first to go through der Verstand, which means the separation. In identity is identity, difference is difference, and they are separated. But with speculative logic, you have to reconstruct this unity of opposed determinations. And that's why Hegelian categories are everywhere in our world, because the world is the manifestation of the logos, which is Hegel's logic. So hopefully it has helped you get a better understanding of it.